All right, I think we're going to get started. So I'm going to pass this off to Andrew, who's going to be moderating this session.
Okay, so yeah, let's get started. So I want to start just by asking a question. There's a powerful analogy that I think underlies some of what's going on between progress in use of AI for coding and progress of use of AI for mathematics. But mathematics is different from coding because what we want to do, coding has to do things, it's engineering mostly, and mathematics has to produce what we value is new, novel mathematics. And that's hard to define, but, like pornography, people know it when they see it. And so the question that I want to start with for the panel is, do you think, on balance, based on what we've seen and what you know in your personal experience, that in the short term, these tools are going to lead to acceleration of the production of novel mathematics?
So from my perspective, I guess maybe we make a distinction. So do I think AI will create novel mathematics in the short term? I think no. But do I think, and I don't know if I need to clarify, like maybe I'm just saying my opinion now, but do I think that it'll actually help in finding or proving new theorems? I think yes. Because, if we can segment a hard mathematical problem into small parts, there is a chance that it could lead to or point us to a literature where it gives some new ideas that we could use.
I think, like, going to your analogy to begin with, I mean, you can make it even very direct analogy. So, like, at the moment, we've seen that AI has been useful for coding. So many things in math, it won't solve your proof, but, like, for example, many things in number theory come from little numerical experiments that now, like, someone without any sort of coding experience can quickly code up, can quickly do experiments. Like, even in some, like, pen and paper work that I've been doing, it, part of it is coming up with a bunch of these, like an ansatz for this, an ansatz for this, and testing whether, and you can test whether such an ansatz is reasonable. Like, it could do a little numerical thing that actually checks that it does the sort of property they want. This is not proof. This is not a thing. But this is the things that are accessible now. Like, it's not going to give you a paper. In the end, this is meant to be a pen and paper proof, but it gives me little experiments that I can do now that will accelerate the math.
Yeah, so I think this is related to your answer, Tristan. So I guess I'm unsure if it will increase the total amount of novel mathematics produced in the next N years, but I think it will increase the amount that I produce, and there may be externalities which reduce the total amount in other ways. And also, I think one place that it is very useful is, we've talked a lot about trying to get it to produce proofs and the issues with this, where it's very hard to check proofs, and then there's formalization, blah blah blah. But I think one thing that doesn't get talked about as much, and this is kind of related to what Tristan is saying, is that it's very, very good for computations, because often for computations you have a way to sanity check it. Like, you can ask it to compute something, and then you can ask it to do a simulation to check if its computation is correct, or run it in computer algebra. And I think for me that's been one of the most useful uses. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Sure. I guess I've had both positive and negative experience in this sense. So, I'm kind of a noob to actually using the AI systems, but, on the negative side, I started playing around, with just asking it questions about things I'm interested in. So some process, and I asked, how do certain things change if I change parameters? And it told me something really surprising. And it was really surprising because it was wrong, but I didn't I couldn't a priori figure out that it was wrong. So I spent a long time kind of thinking about it, and then I queried it more, and eventually I just worked out like some example and proved that it was wrong. So, there is the risk that it takes you down rabbit holes, and you kind of become less efficient on account of that. On the other hand, in a paper that we're writing, we had written a proof of something, and then I kind of fed the question into the AI, and it actually pointed me to a paper which basically gave what we needed. The proof was maybe half a page, so it wasn't a big savings. It was also embarrassing because it was a paper of two of my students. But anyway.
Well, as I explained to the organizers more than once, I don't really understand why I was asked to be on a panel about fundamental uses of AI in math, because I have no real interest in that question. I'm interested in the why people ask that question, and I'm interested in the way it's framed among mathematicians and how that's different from the way it's framed in other activities. I brought as one of my props this catalog of an exhibition in Paris called "The World Through AI." It was at an art museum, and the artists are very much more aware of all the background material, the material issues that go into the development of AI. And what I could say, two things. First of all, I've never used computers in my work in any form. I decided very early on that in order to use a computer, in order to present a question to a computer, I basically have to solve it. And I don't see how that changes with anything that I've seen up to now. So that's one point. And so my position on this panel is to represent the people who are not concerned by the question on the panel. And so I did a couple of surveys in the last few days, and I've gathered that among the graduate students who answered whether they use this sort of thing, about 25% said yes, not counting the ones who said they found it counterproductive, and then another 25% said they might in the future. So that leaves 50% of mathematics unrepresented. It was about the same when I gave a colloquium talk yesterday at Penn. About 50% of the audience said they may use AI in their research, but didn't have time to check that. And I have a specific challenge to AI, but I will bring that up. It may be in a different question with my other prop.
Well, I think that looking back 3 months, just 3 months ago, 3 months ago, I used to use different chat interfaces daily. I've not used them since, and have been using the CLI interfaces for Agentic, Claude Code, Codex, Gemini, etc. every day. I start the day with an update of these things that are writing themselves and updating 2-3 times a day, and then use them very professionally with their different tools. And one of their tools that they allow is actually interrogating expert humans at their subject, at their expertise. And I work weekly with mathematicians, one in academia and one in industry. And what I found was when using these tools, the tools ask the mathematician questions interactively to make choices before proceeding and doing something. And then the mathematician says, I thought about this, or I thought about this, and then answers. Essentially, it's like this RLHF where the machine is asking the mathematicians option A, B, C, D, which route should I take, essentially, and different routes. So this mode of interaction, working humans in conjunction with AI, is really useful for the mathematicians. And the other sentiment, this was a sentiment reiterated by the other mathematician who said, listen, if this continues as in the path of coding 2 proofs, we will need some formal way to review all of these things. And he was advocating for formal proof verification. And that is the message that I was relaying here in that context. So I think being up to speed in the latest agentic tools and using them professionally is a lot. Instead of just getting advice and answers, now we have tools that can do things. And this is a big difference in the past 3 months or so.
Yeah, I want to give opportunity for people for crosstalk. So if there are responses in cross, please do it.
I just want to say just another, I mean, this came up in a few of the talks, but a lot of people, their first interaction with AI is like, here's this lemma, can you prove this lemma? And what if you have much more modest goals, think of the questions you would ask a PhD student. So I have this lemma. I kind of know how to prove it. Like you have to use this, and this. Here's a paper I want you to have a look at. And if you think of it as what all the information that you would gather and give to a PhD student to solve that problem, and you give it to it. Now, these are problems you could solve yourself, if you had enough time. But the question was like whether it could accelerate. And in this case, like you could solve yourself, but I also have to prepare these lecture notes. I have to deal with these PhD students. Like it can help you in this scenario. So there's many things which are, if your goals are much more modest, it can actually accelerate.
I guess there's always the question, in training PhD students, does that actually accelerate your research or does it slow it down? Of course you do it for other reasons. You do it to help people and to build the field up. And so there's these sort of social value to it. I think ultimately it is also, it does accelerate your field and it creates this sort of tree effect. And I wonder a little bit about how much that is true with AI. If you're putting in this time to train the AI and have this back and forth, is it paying off for the AI in some way? Is it really learning and becoming better?
I can answer that quite quickly. One of my colleagues was using the AI so repetitively, Cloud Code, etc., that all of a sudden a badge from Anthropic popped up in the screen saying, "You are now getting a badge because you passed some threshold of teaching our model by doing this," right? And that was surprising to us. We were working on this. I think that these tools allow to use memory and efficiently. Otherwise, the experience may be very annoying and it's frustrating to teach the student something new and over again. Imagine teaching something for a whole week and then the next week completely forgets, or the next session forgets. So knowing how to manage these sessions with the AI, managing its skill set and developing its skills in a continual learning loop is super important. And so setting up a continual learning loop with these active tools, I think is like a baseline.
Yeah, I was curious while watching the presentations to understand how these models have improved in so quickly, and especially since Sergei Gukov explained that they have already been trained on practically everything that has ever been written, well, there's so some people are getting badges. I don't know if they're wearing them or not, but again, the people who contributed to this are very much aware of this, of what's going on, how, at least in some cases, the models are improving, the artists. Does anybody see where there might be a problem with this? I mean, I'm scheduled to get a few $1,000s from Anthropic, as a matter of fact. I'm going to quote a to the report. Brave New World, Justice for Creators in the Age of Generative AI. Creators champion Baroness Kidron said ministers that fail to explain why global AI corporations worth billions should be granted privileged access to the cultural assets of this country, while creators were being asked by their own government to sacrifice their futures, or in exchange for badges, maybe. Anyway, this is the sort of question that is essentially never raised by mathematicians. And it's always the very first question that's raised by artists and writers and musicians and journalists and so on. So, and this is the sort of question that interests me rather than, predicting the future.
So just, I think, to paraphrase the question, it's, should we be investing our time in training the people or not the people, the systems that will put us out of work? Is that more or less what you're expressing there? Or?
I have another story. I mean, things are moving. Just last week, I got a message, and some other colleague did, from something called Handshake AI, and this is interesting. Dear Professor, I hope this email finds you well. Invitation to selective paid research project involving expert evaluation of AI systems to help train an AI model to read, interpret, and summarize peer-reviewed scientific literature. And it's not in exchange for badges. These compensation $185 to $400 an hour, 10 hours per week, flexible. Start as soon as last Monday. So if you think about these 9-figure sign-up bonuses that we read about, this is not at that level, but it's pretty good compared to a university salary, a supplement. And this answers one of the questions we were supposed to prepare, which is, how do you expect the broader mathematical infrastructure will change? Well, as an answer, in historical perspective, it's a textbook example of what's called de-skilling. That is to say, the transfer of skill from the human practitioner or artisan to the corporation, or other textbooks, it's called alienation of labor. The results, note, they do not say who has commissioned. Handshake is a handshake but a handshake through a curtain between the trainer and the corporate sponsor. And it's an invitation to take a place on a spectrum of what's called ghost work. That was Karen Howe reported on this in the MIT Tech Review, or micro work, or human robots. And it's basically the same concept as tagging images or filtering videos, which is what's the method of Amazon's Mechanical Turks. And already last July, the Financial Times, I hope everybody who's interested in AI and mathematics is reading the Financial Times, announced AI groups spend to replace low-cost data labelers, that's the Mechanical Turks, with high-paid experts. And these high-paid experts are getting maybe an order of magnitude more than what was offered to me. So anyway, that's
So this is one thing that I think about in terms of, and people mentioned externalities a little bit, is when I see that OpenAI raised hundreds of billions of dollars for their next round of investment, how many graduate students that would train.
How many
math faculty members?
Or the money that goes into running a single model, for DeepThink or whatever. Right.
And I think this leads to another question that I want to ask, which is that one thing that, again, is being seen in computer science is that there's a lot of concern about training. So these models are clearly powerful tools in the hands of people who are already experts. There is much concern about producing the next generation of experts, particularly when you can't trust anything that a student does that you don't see them do. Right? And again, for highly motivated students, this is not an issue, but for people somewhere other places on the distribution of internal drive, it's a concern. And I wonder what people think about the impact, maybe not necessarily from such a negative perspective, but just the impact on the training of graduate students as you think about your own graduate students, as well as sort of broader context.
I guess it's going to depend a little bit on where the ability of the systems goes, right? Because, right now, if I feed in a graduate problem set, from my graduate probability class, it tends to do pretty well on it. Maybe there are some questions I put on that unintentionally were really hard, and it doesn't. But, when you go beyond that and you start moving into research level math, even kind of parallel to, okay, I wrote this paper, now I want you to do this slight variation. I haven't seen that it has that ability. You and I are part of this group that have been testing kind of on our own research math. And even when I give it things that are parallel to a 5-page proof in the literature, it requires some thinking and some modification. It doesn't do it. It's not able to do it. A graduate student also wouldn't be able to do it very quickly, but maybe with 6 months or, some amount of training, it would. So if it gets to the point where it can kind of do all of the sort of parallel problems, that becomes a problem for graduate training, right? Because that's the thing you start students on, right? And I don't see that these LLMs will get to the point of really kind of breakthrough creativity and maybe they will, but I don't see that near, or setting the sort of program of, if I look at my own research over the last 15 years, there's like 4 programs, each one of 20 pages or something. It doesn't do that yet, but that's not what you have a graduate student do in the beginning. So it feels like they might end up needing to skip steps, and that could be really bad for them, or they just feel like those steps are worthless, which will be difficult.
Yeah, I think it's a real worry because I think that, I mean, even in like, I explain to people like it's not, you don't want to say this is a lemma, prove it. Like the most successful application of AI is where you really do have that expert knowledge, and if you're taking these shortcuts with LLMs through your training, that there's a deep worry, and I'm really worried about this particular. So I don't think it's like LLMs are not capable about this year, but say in 3 years or something, where you take a PhD thesis, which could be basically take this paper and apply it in a slightly different setting. Now, this is something that it can't be done with the current LLMs now, but say in a few years, this is actually something that I could think could be possible. And if all these sort of like these kind of papers, which is kind of the bread and butter of what, I mean, not all, some people have an amazing PhD thesis which really changed the field, but a lot of graduate students have sort of incremental research. And if that is just amount of a prompt, then that's kind of a scary reality. And also for journals and for editors, it will be a nightmare.
So I'd like to address the flip side of that. I think the question here is, what would we do under such circumstances and situation? And I hope that we will still value human abstract and critical thinking and the human understanding of mathematics. And I think even when these capabilities continuously improve, as they're making progress, there will still be a value for us for human understanding of mathematics and abstract critical thinking.
But I want to respond to that and just ask, I think the thing that I'm personally very concerned about and that drove this question is that I think for everybody sitting up here and many people in this room, the way you obtained that critical thinking facility and that understanding of mathematics was like sitting in a room feeling confused for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And if that process is short-circuited because all of the easy problems you can just ask, yes, again, the ascetics and monks among us who will, turn off their computer and lock themselves in a tower for years and years might manage, but everybody else will be screwed.
Somebody in the audience is strongly objecting to the whole line of.
Hello. First of all, I'm very skeptical about it. I was very interested about it since I don't know. I think like I was 14. I was with my brother. We were trying to make our calculator compose music, whatever. It doesn't matter anymore. But this fear of AI. I mean. In my opinion, is incorrect. Society, mankind lived through many invention of many tools, starting from pliers, cars, I mean, you name it, sewing machines, and nothing destroyed society. The society always adjusted. And so what it means is that human creativity will learn how to use these tools. And what we call creative now will not be creative anymore, right? I came long ago from Soviet Union to America, and it was like day and night in terms of life. But one of the surprising aspects is that I was tutoring math, actually, at that undergraduate level, something about integrals. I don't remember the student. And the student says, by the way, before we discuss the integrals, the professor told me to ask the tutor to review how to add fractions, right? So that was the, and so, no, but the thing is that this question led me and my brother to the question, what is intelligence? If the calculator can add fractions, then maybe it's not a so valuable skill anymore. And so now you're asking the same question again. If the thing can prove some theorem, maybe that's not intelligence anymore. It was, but not now. But something else will be intelligence. And so to me, like we don't know what that thing is, maybe, and things will transform. But that's.
But I want to respond to that by saying that you're right. That every time there's technological change, there's transition in the way people work. Right? We've seen this over and over again. But in the United States, if you look at examples, that's led to untold human misery. Right? Deindustrialization of New York City was a disaster for the people who lived there, many of them. And you're right. New York City is still a vibrant place, and people still live here. We all do, most of us. But you might still worry about that transient, even if in the long run,
Yes.
you know, there'll be some other equilibrium which is as attractive as the one we have now. And I don't think it's silly to worry about that.
No, the transient is a problem. I don't have answers to this, but I'm saying, like, in the grand scheme of things, right? If you're looking sort of far future, not past the transient, then people will invent something. I mean, I don't know. That's my hope.
So
Yeah, I don't think there's that much to. I mean, I don't have the worry that math. Some people in the talking about math will be solved in like 6 months or what. I think that's ridiculous. So I agree with you. Like I don't think there's any worry about like the need for math, but I do think that the transition is that into the new equilibria is something that we have to think about how that affects, for example, graduate training. And
I don't know if this is part of the theme of, like, it's not graduate training, but it's master's level students. So I was taking some courses with them, and it's actually the first time I felt old, because there was the guys like 20, early 20s, and in my late 20s, whatever. I would take a day to code something, and they'd take an hour. And I was just like, okay, so this is, my skills are clearly not, really good right now. And then I realized it's all Copilot. So it's all doing the coding for them. And even the answering of the math is all different language models. You ask Gemini, you ask GPT, you get different answers. Or what do I do? I'll ask Claude, And I realized that master students are almost exclusively learning like this. And I can understand the temptation, right? So they probably have a job lined up in a year. They need to hit all these courses, you're going to learn deep learning, from the start. Okay, take 5 courses, use LLM to get through all the problem sets, whatever, done. And use another LLM to code. But I do fear, like, if this is what the next generation is going to do, and if it starts from the undergraduate level, I don't know if we in this panel care about what happens if they go to the workforce, but still, like, it still seems like a worrying thing.
So I want to come back to adding fractions. No, it's a good point. So I don't think that a calculator adding fractions is intelligence, right? But on the other hand, I think that the people who came up with the notion of a fraction and understood how one should think about adding fractions, and that there was meaning to adding fractions, are geniuses, right? And so when calculators come along, people stop understanding what's behind adding fractions. And so that's why you have these people who just add the top and add the bottom. And that's, obviously the right way to do it. And I've taught people like that too. And it's because they lack an understanding of kind of the foundational, how does one define what a fraction is? How does one define what addition means? Really kind of basic, like almost philosophical, set theoretic type questions, right? Like construction. And so that is my same fear here. It's not, and of course, when you do that, when you forget how to add fractions, you make stupid mistakes and you don't know the difference, right? You see a half plus a half is a half, right? And that just doesn't make sense. But people lose that ability to know that something doesn't make sense. And so the fear is that as you rely more and more on things like AI, which may be very useful in the same way calculators are extremely useful, in the hands of people who know how to add fractions, but not in the hands of people who add the numerator and denominator.
So that's, to me, is the real challenge, is the ability to teach. I don't know if you're talking about new generation, to teach to recognize those things. Yeah, so that I don't know how to do, and I don't know if it's even possible. Yeah, so that's the big question, how to make. Yeah, I saw that. I saw that. Yeah.
I have different fears than those that have been expressed so far, and I've started reading a book called "Waiting for Robots" by Antonio Casilli, who turns things around. He says that actually it's not the machines that do the work of humans, but humans who are tasked to provide digital labor for the machines by training, maintaining, and imitating them. So again, based on a historical on historical study of automation over centuries, the conclusion is not that jobs are replaced. It's not that human workers are replaced. It's that they are de-skilled. That they're a great deal of. He argues, I haven't got to that point yet, that AI is not actually eliminating jobs. The number of jobs is not decreasing, but the kinds of jobs that are available are increasingly the kinds of jobs that are subordinate to training the machines. But for theoretical mathematics, this does not apply. There is no commercial value. I mean, with something that has not been brought up, there's no commercial value in what most of us do. So why is the industry so keen on spending so much money on and on well, not that much money on this selective paid research project involving expert evaluation of mathematics, but in mathematics in general? What is the reason? I have an answer to that, but I'll save it.
Well, the most obvious answer is venture capital, that you want to prove that you have a strong system and you want to prove it on something that's concrete, and math is concrete, But I think there are other reasons. Somebody mentioned a day or maybe yesterday that if you can solve math with AI, or really do good math with AI, then you can do the same with law. And then you don't need lawyers who are scrubbing and making arguments, because if you have AI systems that were trained on math and writing logical arguments in math, you do the same thing in that context, and that would be a lot of money. So I can imagine there are other reasons as well.
Will come first, though.
It's a smaller cannon, maybe. I don't know.
I can just see automating the Supreme Court, but that would be solved.
I have a kind of pragmatic answer to the previous question regarding graduate students. Well, we can make a distinction between undergrad and graduate courses and say have graduate courses that you can't solve homeworks in these classes without using AI. So if I encourage using AI and give homeworks at a level that without it, you can't pass the class without using AI, then you develop a different skill, sometimes a different skill of how to do things or what to do. And sometimes, there is a concern of it, I'm not even thinking about the how, I'm just thinking about the what instead of how to do something. But essentially, the problems and the problem sets become harder and harder in the advanced class. The second thing regarding learning and the undergrad ability, it's important to point out that all of these models have guided learning or for education fine-tuned. So if you go into learning mode in these models, they're excellent teachers in explaining things. Explain to me like I'm 18, like I'm an undergrad, like a grad, and like a PhD when I look at a problem. And if you use these models and you're concerned about the undergrad education, etc., then I would highly recommend to use these guided learning modes that all the models have nowadays. And they do excellent job in giving examples and explaining and very methodological and autodidact. So let's flip this. Let's use these models to our advantage to improve undergrad training by using them for education, and then level up the grad training by asking harder problems.
I mean, I think there's like, whether that's a good idea or bad, I think there's the fundamental, that there's a basic issue with such a thing is, so if you pay for, say, if you get the Columbia, I think give you ChatGPT Pro or whatever, but then if you have wealthy parents who pay for whatever the most expensive subscription with and have access, basically don't have rate limits or whatever, then the person with the access to the most expensive models that can burn through as much electricity as possible will be those ones that can solve the hardest problems, compared to those students who are using the model provided by the university. So like, even even whether you think it's a good idea or not, from a practical point of view, you're giving those students an inherent advantage.
Well, just bringing it back to mathematical research, the same is true, right? So, you got to work with DeepMind, which is great, but how many millions of dollars of compute time, right? And so in some sense, it's funny to see Terry Tao doing all of this work and solving these Erdős problems, like he needs more problems that he solved, right? It's like rewarding the rich, and becomes just worse in that regard, right?
Fortunately, I think Google did a good job in providing a free pro subscription to all students, and I hope these companies continue to do that for education purposes, and they have these education plans. So I'm really glad that the students can enjoy that and use all these pro tools for free. That's just on the pragmatic day-to-day side of teaching using these tools. But I do agree that on the harnesses side, the more advanced problems, people have used more resources, and those people, the haves and haves not in terms of computation, have moved on to tackle harder problems and with more success. That I agree.
Yeah, and to Michael's point, when I first, got involved in this AI and math stuff, and I think Sergey mentioned this as well in his talk, I was more entranced by the idea of a bigger synergy between the CS department and the math department, because I think, if anything, computer science showed us that something that we thought was very complicated is actually understood by linear algebra and activation functions, i.e. human language. I mean, it wouldn't come intuitively to think that that's possible, and suddenly we see it is. And this incredible ability to, search for something similar and, encapsulate meaning of something complicated and find these patterns is something very useful. And I don't think that language models in the end will be doing the math for us. And I don't think, mathematicians should be putting their labor into data labeling stuff for LLMs. I think more broadly, they should be thinking, maybe about how can we, talk more with CS people to actually get, math to be, to help us do our math problems. That's because they have all these techniques that are very powerful. And I think there's just a disconnect between the communities. And if we can strengthen that, then we could lead to better ultimate output in general.
Let me say something positive for a change. It's very quickly about the industry. Their stock market is falling again today. The fact that there are corporations worth several $1 trillion is presented generally in the media as a sign that the economy is very healthy, whereas I think it's a sign of a very serious problem. Fortunately, there are a few examples of mathematicians who have used machine learning to solve problems without going through the industry, without any connection to the industry. And so in my own field, Thomas Lanard and Alberto Minguez a few months ago posted a paper to the archive where they found an explicit description of I'll just read it to you, the Aubert-Zelevinsky duality for the group G in terms of language parameters. This is an interesting question. And they did this on a laptop with a template for a neural network found on a site called PyTorch and 100 lines of Python code. So they were able to do this. And apparently there is a website, I haven't looked at this, a website curated by somebody named Siwoo Lee that listed 63 awesome papers exploring the use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning for mathematical discoveries. And of these 63 awesome papers, only 3 seem to have been written in collaboration with Silicon Valley. specifically with DeepMind. So if one removes the industry, then there's a very different discussion. And so what, especially since the industry, as I already said, I strongly believe, has no long-term interest. Once the competition is sorted out, and among the current competing models, and one or two win out and get all the money, then they're going to move to using whatever it is they've developed for the genuinely profitable applications, primarily military and surveillance, because that's where the money always is. So two problems with the industry: first, concentration of wealth; second, the long-term commitment to not only to sponsoring movies about famous people's wives, but to military and surveillance applications. This is it. I would be much more comfortable in a panel discussion where the industry was just completely off limits. I have another not positive comment, but I'll save that for.
And the issues with ML, a lot of the big developments, inevitably did have impacts on like naval research or whatever. So it would be a bit restricting to then say, well, because that's where some of the innovation actually happened, when it was, motivated by that. DARPA. Yeah, exactly. Game theory sort of originated to some degree there. So.
And one thing I'll say, having worked with industry, is that you shouldn't be you can do a lot. I mean, it's not completely, still, if you have to get a Claude subscription, I mean, that's not it's expensive for especially for graduate students or so forth. But let's think of, for example, researchers that can afford this. What they can do with current models without actually a collaboration with industry is quite a lot. These results that I present here, pretty much all those solutions were found by my postdoc using NYU resources, not using DeepMind resources. So you didn't need huge resources to actually find it. You can use, and I would say, from all the math collaborations that I'm aware of with industry, most of those could have all been solved with limited, with using some resources, but not anything that you wouldn't be able to have available to you if you're a professor at Columbia, which is quite prestigious. You have a lot more resources than other people, but you don't need to work with $1 trillion company in order to do that research. I'm not aware of any sort of collaboration with industry that couldn't have been done just purely in academia.
So we're sort of coming to the end of the panel a little bit, and there's already been some audience participation, but I want to open things up so that if people in the audience have questions or suggestions or whatever, now's a good moment. In the front row.
Thanks for the panel. Yeah, thanks for the panel. One of the things I'm wondering about is people's thoughts on how things might change the practice of mathematics, like professional mathematics. It seems like, for better or for worse, one of the effects of AI tools and so on is that there'll be more research, more productivity, whatever that means. And that's, one can imagine, there's benefits to that, but also, sociological problems to that. So I'm just curious what people's perspectives on, how should this affect what we value as mathematicians? How do we value people's or assess people's output?
Maybe I'll start by, I think that there's going to be more crank publications. I already see this in combinatorics, there's a lot of, basically AI produced proofs that it takes people a while to sit down and find the flaws, right? But they're there. So I think that it might just inundate, it's very easy to create crappy papers. I guess the one thing I like about the AI discussion is that it helps highlight what it is that mathematicians really do and like what we should really value, which is original thinking, new pathways, new approaches, not necessarily proving big results, but having new ideas. And, of course, this is to the detriment of training, right? Because in training, you often don't train somebody on a new idea. You train them on existing ideas. You still want people to be able to get papers, or you need to change the criteria for getting, a position, because maybe, many people will not come up with a new idea until a little later in their career. But I do like the focus, and if we really think hard about where value is and we try to extract that in papers, I think it will protect us from some of the issues that will come from mass use of AI.
I have a suggestion that there was a paper by Akshay Venkatesh a few years ago on very, very much this question: what will mathematicians value? Assuming that there will be like alpha zero, there will be an aleph zero that can do, this is a magical idea. But imagining there's such a thing, then mathematicians will have to reflect on what they value. Another consequence, this is maybe not what you had in mind, is that mathematicians, this is already happening, are talking more to philosophers. There are meetings about primarily around AI, because what does this imply? And there are even mathematicians collaborating with philosophers. I count myself among them, but there have been recently, very, very recently, some papers by people who had not done things like this in the past, but who, because of whatever AI means for the future of the profession, have written and published papers and taken part in conferences.
So the panel talked a lot about like graduate training and how is that going to be affected by AI. And so this question is two-parter. First one would be how do you think the academics and people who are teaching at the graduate level, how do they change with this like deluge of, well, students training themselves or failing at training themselves with AI and then coming to class? And so what do the teachers and like the academics sort of like offer to student that's going to be many standard deviations away from what the AI offers, right? And second, do you think the models in their current capability, do you think it's a worthwhile direction to use them to prove like the known results or a known bound? And even though it might be hard, but well, if we could improve on the previous known result, even on an epsilon level, right? That's still a result. Well, mathematicians would decide whether that's rigor or not, but it's still a direction that students might want to take. If I know it's a vague question, but yeah.
Let me just say, come back March 12th, because we're going to go deep dive into this, but we can tease some aspects of that. You asked about what is the advantage of having a human versus AI, right? The sort of in mathematical training, and I think that's a great question. When I teach, and I'm not sure I'm better than AI when I teach, but I think that the important thing is trying to be able to first understand people's questions, understand what they're after, but really communicate more than just how you do something, but how do you think? How do I think? So when people come to office hours, that's what I spend most of my time on is, answering not necessarily why, how does this particular problem work, but how should I be thinking about this problem, or why is this a problem? So again, like Michael was saying, a little bit more philosophical, and and then being able to read people, being able to kind of go. And mathematicians are great at reading people. We're really that's our skills.
I think also, just to respond to your second thing, one thing that I think is likely to happen in ways we don't understand yet is that what mathematicians value will change. And personally, and this is just a religious conviction, I don't like the kind of mathematics where it's like twiddling some bound to go from 1.9 to 1.91 for the most part. And although there are some subfields where that's an industry, and if that gets devalued because machines can do it, maybe that's okay. But
the point was, well, teaching in itself, at least from the outside, doesn't have like the determinism that, well, professors would like, where every semester the class that I taught before is going to be the same the next semester, right? It usually isn't the case. Well, that's also kind of the same with the models, right? The models are built on this like stochastic nature. So the question would be, there is this jaggedness in terms of like what we perceive the model's capabilities are versus the model's actual capabilities, which neither we know nor the creators do, right? The creators are asking the mathematicians to discover new capabilities and like, oh, tell me what my model is capable of with all the data that it's trained on. So yeah.
But another thing that is important when you think about teaching, so this is, I'd say, really true at the university level, is that you have a professor or postdocs, spectacular researchers who are teaching every level of class, calculus, linear algebra, up to very, very high level classes. Often, so they have much more information than they're communicating in the class. And first of all, it means that they're right. Right, they actually know what they're saying, what they're talking about. They're not just reading from a book, right? But they also know where are the kind of hidden holes. What are the key examples people need to have? What are the key thoughts? But then they know where things go, right? And being able to give the glimmer of, okay, we're talking about calculus, but if you want to think about a real system, you should be thinking about a partial differential equation, and here's the sort of ideas, and just give people that direction. Not everyone will follow that, but that opportunity is super valuable.
So full disclosure, glad you did you enjoy the class? Oh, okay, great. So this is one of my former students, but I like the fact that you mentioned the jagged edge of AI, the jagged edge of learning AI, where it has sometimes simple holes and it's not like a smooth boundary of knowledge, etc. There was one thing, I think there is room for academia, industry, government. Personally, I was 4 years funded for a DARPA project on data discovery of models. And that was a collaborative effort among hundreds of universities in the country. And that knowledge and that funding resulted in papers, which were then simulated in industry, which resulted in more work, etc. So I think that there is this cross-pollination between academia, industry, and government, as well as between teaching and research, which is important to be inclusive and diverse.
Hi, I think we've been talking a lot about education today, but mostly focusing on the graduate education. However, right now, the way I see it, we actually we've been also talking a lot about long-term implications and how the vision of a long-term education changes, but almost nothing is being done about short-term or mid-term right now. And moreover, I think, yes, the graduate education will have to change a lot, but at least graduate students who are already PhD students right now, they already have some knowledge on how to do research, some basic concepts, etc. But undergrad students and master students right now, they don't have this knowledge yet, and they are not learning. Like most of them simply stop learning like at all. Because I've been teaching like undergrad master classes recently. I've been talking with a lot of undergrad students, and I see that most of them, they use LLM in like the worst way possible, basically without trying to apply any critical thinking. And the thing about LLMs, I think, that they have a lot of variants of like the educational and other outcomes, in the sense that the variance is on how you use it. And there is no training for students whatsoever on how to use the system. So I think like one of the obvious like things which we can do right now, do the classes on how to properly use LLMs for math, for studying, even for studying. Yes, there is study mode, but you still need to use it right. A lot of people even don't know about study mode. Right now, it's like a wild west, and we don't teach undergrads anything about that. So I think like that's one thing. Another thing, professors have a lot of professors TAs have a lot of context. They cannot share it in class, but they could, in theory, teach an agent or to give this context, give it in the right way. This is also not done. So I'm kind of curious, like, what do you see are feasible ways of doing short-term changes for the education for undergrad, masters, and maybe graduate as well?
Well, I guess all of the above. So you're more than welcome to come in TA with some of my classes. But yeah, we are exactly focusing on those things. I think you hit the nail. All these suggestions are actually being implemented in classes, undergrad and grad classes. And these are critical and important things that you mentioned.
Just like one thing.
So I think we should save some of this for March 12th. I wanted, Jessica, you had a question. I want to hear the philosophical perspective.
Yes, I'll take Michael's mention of philosophy as an indication that it's okay for me as a philosopher to open my mouth. So one of the things that we do as philosophers is something we think of as conceptual analysis. So, for example, I'm teaching an epistemology course at the moment that's canvassing the last 60 years of research on trying to give an analysis of what it means for S to know that P. A lot of work has been done similarly on the concept of causation. This seems to me to be a potential area where philosophical research might be aided by artificial intelligence. It also, some skeptics in philosophy point to the repeated failures of attempts to give successful analyses of S knows the P, right? Which is a process of offering a putative set of necessary and sufficient conditions and then testing it against thought experiment, right? You think up a scenario. Well, here's a scenario that satisfies those conditions, and yet intuitively we think that the agent doesn't know. It occurs to me that most of the conversation today has focused on mathematical problem solving or lemma proving, etc. But there's another thing that mathematicians do and do very, very well, and that's conceptual analysis. So, for example, think of the work of, in the 19th century, of Bolzano and Cauchy, Weierstrass in formulating notion of continuity, etc. Or think of the work of Alan Turing and Alonzo Church in the 1930s in the conceptual analysis of the notion of an effective procedure or algorithm and the formulation of the formal concept of recursive function. Those are superbly successful conceptual analyses. And the work, this kind of work in mathematics, it seems to me, makes itself invisible in the sense that the successful analyses then become the definitions in the textbooks that are written and from which the next generation of students learn. And it's easy to overlook the importance of this kind of non-problem solving contribution. But this is something I think also that AI has potentially something to offer, and something to offer philosophy.
It's like adding fractions, right? You know, the basis of mathematics. So you think that actually AI can help? Because my perspective has been that the AI is not very useful at the sort of big picture. Like, okay, it's useful at big picture in the sense of summarizing what lots of different research is and kind of, but in new conceptual things, I haven't seen use of it yet there.
Well, I've sort of heard enough this afternoon to inspire me to go away and start to quiz Claude or something on the literature, the epistemology literature from the 70s and 80s, and say, you know what, here are some analyses that were offered. Here are the counterexamples that were given. What are some plausible looking next steps?
Just be sure to use the superpowers plugin. And
I mean, I completely agree with you, and I think probably the whole panel is of the opinion that that's the one thing that's probably not going to happen in the next 10 years. That's why we didn't focus on it. But yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly. It's incredibly difficult to look at all these counterexamples and come up with a definition that somehow encompasses all the issues and leads mathematics forward. I mean, that's what makes math, in my mind, math. And probably with all this AI stuff, that's probably the one thing we're going to hold on to for some time. I don't know how long, but for some time.
I guess I'm not convinced of this, because what is a good definition but looking at a bunch of examples and generalizing? So we'll see, but I don't know that I'm convinced that it won't be able to do that.
I think one of the issues is, if I look at my math papers, I have many, and then I think about what were the good ideas and what proportion of the text was a good idea and what proportion of the text was just implementing it. Maybe 1% or 0.1% was a good idea, and then the rest is doing it. And so unless the LLM is really good at picking out the good idea, it's going to train on the doing it part. And so it's not going to get good at the good idea part. And because most of that, of course, most of the time, much of the time is spent coming up with a good idea, but that happens here. And that's, as of yet, not so easy for the LLMs to train on.
But I guess then, there's a utopian vision where we spend all our time having good ideas, and once we have the good idea, we can tell the LLM, and the LLM will write the paper, and we have more time to have good ideas. That may or may not happen.
That's utopian in some sense, although that might just be Terry Tao and a bunch of machines.
There.
I don't know. I think you need the balance, because there have been times where I've gotten out of the habit of working out the details myself. And then if I go for too long in that mode, then I'm no longer able to come up with good ideas. So you need both. You need to be in the thick of it as well.
So are we out of time? So I think we're out of time, actually. So let's do one last question in the back there. You? Another person? Yeah, you.
Oh, there it is. I'm curious, how do you think we currently train humans to detect and come up with good mathematical ideas? And presumably, I guess it's related to AI, because presumably AI has access to like millions of magnitudes greater papers and data that it can process. So maybe some part of it is just the proportion of data it has is not comprised of good ideas, but implementations. But I guess so I'm curious about maybe what might go missing if AI starts being capable of doing tasks that you currently give to grad students, and also what part of that process has worked before, if that makes sense.
One thing, I would just say with my own research is as a mathematician, I've built my own set of heuristics that I have built over time that sort of guide and give me some sort of it's basically a tool set of how I go about attacking a problem. And they're sort of very vague things that are not written down anywhere, that And I assume that every mathematician had their own sort of tool set. I mean, there was a famous example that we talked about. Bourgain had Bourgain had famously his papers were impossible to read because his tool set was so vast, and he made he's basic to go from one step to the other. He was basically if it involves some subset of his tool set, then he didn't have to explain any details. And you only develop those tools by actually doing things, like actually doing exercises and like really getting into the weeds of problems. And if you're just handing off these problems to LLMs, then you don't build your own internal way of thinking of problem solving. You're just relying on what the LLM does. I think that's what I find dangerous in the sense of removing these sort of easier problems. I mean, I imagine it will get to the stage where we have to, what's publishable will be changed because we can't just publish everything that is a slight modification of what's before. So if the level is so high to get publications, how are you meant to learn these, learn how to get into the weeds and build your own internal toolkit for how you think about problems? And that's, I don't know the answer to that. That's
All right, maybe that's a good place to stop. So I want to thank all the panelists for doing this. Thanks. And I want to leave you with one thought, which I get to issue because I'm running the panel, which is that historically, and this isn't exactly germane to the panel per se, but people are very bad at reasoning about what the future will look like when things that used to be costly become free across many, many domains. This is a universal human truth. And this is really what's going on now. And so, you should think about that, because I think there'll be many surprising and unpleasant things that happen as a consequence of that. And, interesting also. But anyway, on that note.